It lasted only 14 seconds, 14 seconds that would forever change how the world sees Benjamin Netanyahu. Emmanuel Macron had just finished his diplomatic pleasantries in that secret Paris meeting. He was smiling confident, ready to close what he thought would be another routine negotiation. And then he said three words that made Netanyahu's face turn white as chalk. But what you don't know yet is why those three words terrified the most powerful man in the Middle East more than any military threat ever. Wait! Before I tell you what Macron said, you need to understand something crucial about what was really happening in that room. Because this wasn't just a diplomatic meeting. This was the moment when decades of Netanyahu's carefully constructed lies were about to crumble. And the man who would destroy him. Someone he thought was just another European politician he could manipulate. The Élysée Palace, November 23, 2024. 11:47 p.m. local time. The corridors were empty except for two figures walking toward Macron's private study. Netanyahu had arrived 3 hours earlier through a secret entrance, avoiding all media attention. This meeting didn't exist on any official schedule. In fact, according to diplomatic records, Netanyahu was supposed to be in Tel Aviv attending a security briefing. But he wasn't. He was in Paris, about to face the biggest crisis of his political career. Here's what nobody knew about that night. For 6 months, French intelligence had been building a file on Netanyahu. Not the usual diplomatic intelligence, something much more dangerous. They had recordings, financial documents, secret communications that could end his career in minutes. And Macron had invited him to Paris for one reason, to make him an offer he couldn't refuse. Netanyahu sat across from Macron in the ornate study, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. The French president had been unusually quiet during their preliminary discussions. No small talk about regional politics. No philosophical debates, democracy and security. Just cold, calculating silence. The Israeli prime minister's hands were trembling slightly as he reached for his coffee cup. He tried to maintain his composure, but something in Macron's eyes told him this wasn't going according to plan. Benjamin, Macron began, his voice carrying an unusual weight. We need to discuss your situation. What situation? Keep watching, because what Macron knew would shock even Netanyahu's closest allies. For months, French cyber intelligence had been tracking unusual financial flows through Swiss banks. Money that originated from Israeli defense contracts, but ended up in accounts connected to Netanyahu's family business ventures. Money that violated every international law about corruption and money laundering. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was what they discovered about Netanyahu's secret deals with Iran. Yes, Iran. The country he publicly branded as Israel's greatest existential threat. The same country he spent decades telling the world must be stopped at all costs. While publicly demanding military action against Tehran, Netanyahu had been secretly facilitating back-channel communications that ensured Iranian oil money flowed through Israeli-controlled companies. And Macron had proof of everything. Your business with Tehran, Macron continued, watching Netanyahu's reaction carefully. Quite profitable, wouldn't you say? Netanyahu's face drained of color. This was impossible. Only 3 people in the world knew about those arrangements, and 2 of them were dead. I don't know what you're talking about, Netanyahu stammered, but his voice betrayed him. But here's where the story gets really interesting. Macron slowly opened a folder on his desk. Inside were photographs, bank statements, recorded phone conversations, encrypted messages. Years of evidence showing how Netanyahu had been playing both sides of the Middle Eastern conflict for personal gain. Benjamin, we have everything, Macron said quietly. Every transaction, every secret meeting, every lie you told your own cabinet about Iranian threats while you were making deals with Tehran behind closed doors. Netanyahu stared at the documents. His political life, his legacy, his freedom. Everything was in that folder. And then Macron made his offer. You have 2 choices, the French president continued. You can work with us, follow our guidance in Middle Eastern policy, support our initiatives in the region, or we release everything to the International Criminal Court tomorrow morning. The room fell silent. Netanyahu understood what was happening. This wasn't diplomacy. This was blackmail. France was taking control of Israeli foreign policy through the most powerful tool imaginable. The truth about Netanyahu's corruption. But what happened next is why those 3 words changed everything. Netanyahu tried to negotiate. He offered money, military cooperation, intelligence sharing. He promised to retire quietly after the next election. He begged, pleaded, even threatened to expose French arms deals with questionable regimes. Nothing worked. Macron sat there calmly, occasionally glancing at his watch. He had all the power in that room and he knew it. Your answer, Benjamin? Macron asked after Netanyahu had exhausted all his options. And that's when Netanyahu made the biggest mistake of his political career. Instead of accepting Macron's terms, instead of protecting his own interests like he always had, he stood up and said something that revealed his true tortie. I won't be blackmailed by a French bureaucrat who thinks he understands Middle Eastern politics, Netanyahu said, his voice shaking with rage. Release your documents. I'll deny everything. My people trust me more than they trust your evidence. That's when Macron smiled for the first time that night. Because he had been waiting for exactly that response. He had predicted Netanyahu's arrogance would make him choose the wrong option, and now he could spring his real trap. Benjamin, Macron said, leaning back in his chair, those documents aren't our only evidence. He pressed a button on his desk. A screen descended from the ceiling. Video began playing. What Netanyahu saw on that screen made him sink back into his chair. It was footage from inside the Knesset, Netanyahu's own private office. Hidden cameras had captured him in conversations with Iranian intermediaries, discussing how to maintain the conflict rhetoric while ensuring profitable business relationships continued. But worse than that, far worse, was the footage of Netanyahu laughing about Israeli casualties, joking with business partners about how each terrorist attack actually helped his approval ratings, celebrating the deaths of his own people because it meant more election victories. We've been recording you for 3 years, Macron explained. Every meeting, every private conversation, every moment when you thought nobody was watching. The man who built his career on protecting Israel had been exposed as someone who profited from its suffering. Netanyahu's hands were shaking uncontrollably now. This wasn't just about corruption anymore. This was about treason. About the betrayal of everything he claimed to represent. What do you want? He whispered. And that's when Macron leaned forward and spoke the 3 words that would haunt Netanyahu forever. Complete, total, surrender. But the story doesn't end there. What happened after those words is even more shocking, because Netanyahu didn't just agree to Macron's demands. He broke down completely. 25 years of carefully constructed public persona crumbled in minutes. The strong leader, the defender of Israel, the man who showed weakness, he started crying. Not tears of remorse, tears of a man who realized he had been caught in the ultimate trap. Everything he had built, every lie he had told, every person he had manipulated, it was all over. Macron watched this breakdown with cold satisfaction. This wasn't just about controlling Israeli policy. This was about demonstrating French power to the entire world. If France could break Benjamin Netanyahu, they could break anyone. And then the French president made one final revelation. Benjamin, you're wondering how we got all this information, Macron said as Netanyahu tried to compose himself. You're wondering which of your trusted allies betrayed you. Netanyahu looked up hopefully. Maybe there was still a way out. Maybe he could identify the leak, plug the hole, salvage something from this disaster. The truth is, Macron continued, nobody betrayed you. We didn't need inside sources. What he said next shattered Netanyahu's understanding of everything. Your own security systems betrayed you. Every encrypted phone, every secure computer, every private conversation, we've had access to all of it for years. Israeli cybersecurity, built on French technology that we've always controlled. The implications hit Netanyahu like a physical blow. Not only had he been caught, but Israel's entire intelligence infrastructure had been compromised. Every secret, every operation, every classified communication, France had access to everything. And the worst part, Netanyahu had personally approved the technology purchases that made it all possible. Years ago, in his eagerness to modernize Israeli intelligence capabilities, he had signed contracts with French tech companies. He thought he was strengthening Israel's security. Instead, he had given France the keys to every Israeli secret. My God, Netanyahu whispered, finally understanding the scope of what had happened. You own us. Macron's smile widened. Now you're beginning to understand. But even this wasn't the end of the story. Because what Macron did next revealed the true purpose of everything that had happened in that room. He didn't just want to control Netanyahu. He wanted to destroy him completely and replace him with someone more compliant. Someone who would turn Israel into a French client state in the Middle East. Benjamin, your resignation letter is already prepared, Macron said, sliding a document across the desk. You'll cite health concerns. Your chosen successor will be someone we've already approved. And that's when Netanyahu made his final desperate play. "You think you can control Israel through blackmail?" he said, some of his old fire returning. "You think my people will accept a French puppet as their leader?" Macron laughed. "Benjamin, your people already have been accepting a puppet. The only difference is that now we're changing the strings." The truth behind those three words was finally clear. Complete, total surrender wasn't just about Netanyahu's personal defeat, it was about France's takeover of Israeli sovereignty, decades of planning, years of preparation, all leading to this moment when they could dictate terms to the most militarily powerful nation in the Middle East. But Netanyahu, broken as he was, still had one card left to play. And what he did with that card would determine not just his own fate, but the future of the entire region. "Emmanuel," Netanyahu said quietly, his voice steadier than it had been all night. "Before I sign anything, I want you to know something." Macron gestured for him to continue, confident that nothing Netanyahu could say would change the situation. "You think you're the only one who's been planning for years?" Netanyahu continued. "You think Israel's most experienced politician wouldn't have contingency plans for exactly this scenario?" For the first time that night, uncertainty flickered in Macron's eyes. "What are you talking about?" the French president demanded. Netanyahu reached into his jacket pocket. Macron's security team tensed, but the Israeli prime minister only pulled out a small device. "This conversation has been recorded," Netanyahu announced. "Every word, every threat, every admission of espionage against a sovereign nation." And he glanced at the device. "4 minutes, if I don't send a specific signal, copies of this recording will be transmitted to every major intelligence agency in the world." The entire dynamic in the room shifted in an instant. Macron's confidence evaporated. If Netanyahu's recording became public, it wouldn't just expose the Israeli prime minister's corruption, it would reveal France's systematic espionage against its allies, its manipulation of sovereign governments, its use of technology companies for intelligence gathering. "You're bluffing," Macron said, but his voice lacked conviction. Netanyahu smiled for the first time that night. "Am I? Emmanuel, you've spent 3 years learning everything about me, but there's one thing you never understood. I've been playing this game since before you were born. Did you really think I'd come to Paris without insurance?" The tables had turned completely. Now Macron was the one facing exposure, scandal and political destruction. But the real shock was still coming. "The device in my pocket isn't just recording us," Netanyahu continued. "It's been live streaming this entire conversation to a secure server. Every intelligence agency that matters has been watching this unfold in real time." Macron's face went white. If this was true, then France's intelligence operations in dozens of countries had just been blown. Agents would be arrested, operations would be shut down, diplomatic relationships would be shattered. "What do you want?" Macron asked, echoing Netanyahu's earlier desperation. And Netanyahu's answer revealed the true scope of his planning. "I want complete immunity for everything in your files," he said. "I want guarantees that France will never interfere in Israeli politics again. And I want you to personally ensure that your intelligence services stop targeting Israeli infrastructure." It was Macron's turn to realize he had been outmaneuvered. Netanyahu hadn't come to Paris as a victim. He had come as a predator, using Macron's own tactics against him. But there was still one more twist to come. "And Emmanuel," Netanyahu added, "I want you to understand something about those 3 words you said to me." Macron waited, dreading what was coming next. "Complete, total surrender," Netanyahu repeated slowly. "That's exactly what France is going to give Israel, because the alternative is watching your entire intelligence network collapse overnight." The meeting ended with a very different outcome than either man had expected. Macron agreed to destroy the files on Netanyahu. France would withdraw its intelligence operations from Israeli territory. The French president would even provide Netanyahu with the technology to detect and counter similar operations from other countries. As they shook hands, Macron asked the question that had been burning in his mind: "How long have you known about our surveillance?" Netanyahu's answer was the final revelation of the night. "From the beginning, we let you think you were spying on us while we were actually feeding you carefully crafted information designed to lead you exactly where we wanted you. The entire operation, the recordings, the financial evidence, even the Iranian business deals, had been an elaborate deception." Netanyahu had sacrificed his own reputation, allowed himself to appear corrupt and compromised, all to lure France into revealing the full extent of their espionage network. 3 words had changed everything, but not in the way anyone expected. Complete, total surrender had been meant to destroy Netanyahu. Instead, they became the foundation of Israeli counterintelligence's greatest victory. France's entire Middle Eastern strategy collapsed overnight, and Netanyahu emerged more powerful than ever. The man who had appeared weakest in that Paris meeting had actually been playing the strongest hand the entire time. And the most incredible part, this was just the beginning of what Netanyahu had planned for his enemies. 6 months later, Macron quietly resigned, citing personal reasons. French intelligence operations in the Middle East never recovered. And Netanyahu? He won his next election by the largest margin in Israeli history, campaigning on the theme protecting Israel from foreign interference. But there's something even more shocking about that night in Paris. The conversation between Netanyahu and Macron didn't end when the cameras stopped rolling. What happened in the following hour would reveal the true mastermind behind the entire operation, and it wasn't who anyone expected. After their official agreement, Macron walked Netanyahu to a private elevator that led directly to an underground garage. As they descended, the French president's demeanor changed completely. The defeated, worried man from upstairs was gone. On his place stood someone who looked satisfied. "You played your part perfectly, Benjamin," Macron said with a smile that Netanyahu had never seen before. What Netanyahu heard next made him realize he hadn't won anything at all. "Did you really think this was about French intelligence operations?" Macron continued as the elevator doors opened. "Did you honestly believe we would expose our entire network just to blackmail one politician?" Netanyahu's blood ran cold. "What are you talking about?" The truth was about to shatter everything Netanyahu thought he understood about that night. "Benjamin, you just gave us something far more valuable than your compliance," Macron explained, as they walked through the underground facility. "You gave us complete access to Israeli counterintelligence operations." The revelation hit Netanyahu like a physical blow. The device he thought was protecting him, the recordings he believed were his insurance policy, the entire elaborate counterstrike he had planned, it had all been anticipated. And then Macron showed him how deep the deception really went. They entered a control room filled with monitors and technicians. On the screens, Netanyahu could see live feeds from locations across Israel. His own office, military command centers, intelligence headquarters, all under surveillance. "Your insurance device." Macron gestured to a technician who held up an identical gadget. "French technology. Every signal it sent, every recording it made, every bit of data you thought was protecting you. We received copies in real time." Netanyahu realized he hadn't been playing chess. He had been playing a game where his opponent controlled all the pieces. "The Iranian business deals were real," Macron continued, enjoying Netanyahu's horror. "The corruption evidence was real. But we let you think you were deceiving us because your countermeasures revealed far more than your original crimes ever could." The scope of the operation was breathtaking. For 3 years, Netanyahu had believed he was running a sophisticated counterintelligence operation against France. In reality, he had been systematically exposing every aspect of Israeli security infrastructure. But the final revelation was the most devastating of all. "Benjamin, do you want to know the real purpose of tonight?" Macron asked as they reached the center of the control room. Netanyahu couldn't speak. He could only stare at the monitors showing his country under complete surveillance. "We needed to test our new AI system," Macron explained. "An artificial intelligence program designed to predict and manipulate the behavior of world leaders. You were our beta test." Every move Netanyahu had made, every decision, every clever counterstrike, it had all been predicted and orchestrated by an AI system. The algorithm calculated that if we threatened you with exposure, you would respond with exactly the strategy you used tonight. Macron continued. "It predicted your emotions, your tactics, even the specific words you would use. You performed exactly as programmed." Netanyahu sank into a chair, the full weight of his defeat finally settling in. He hadn't just lost a political battle, he had been reduced to a predictable set of behavioral patterns, manipulated by a machine that understood him better than he understood himself. And then came the final twist that made everything clear. "The best part," Macron said, leaning closer to Netanyahu, "is that this conversation is also being predicted by our AI. Right now, the algorithm is calculating your next move, your emotional state, and the exact moment when you'll accept the inevitable." Netanyahu looked up at Macron with eyes that had lost all hope. "What do you want from me?" "Complete, total surrender." Macron repeated those 3 words from earlier. "But this time, you understand what they really mean." They meant the end of Israeli independence. Within the next 6 months, Netanyahu would gradually implement policies that served French interests, He would make decisions that felt like his own ideas but were actually suggestions implanted through carefully orchestrated chance encounters and casual conversations with people who didn't know they were working for French intelligence. The most terrifying part, Netanyahu would never be sure which of his thoughts were his own, and which were planted by the AI system. Every advisor who approached him, every piece of intelligence he received, every option presented to him, all of it would be filtered through the French system. He would become a puppet who believed he was still pulling his own strings. But why? Netanyahu asked, his voice barely a whisper. Why go to all this trouble for one country? Macron's answer revealed the true scope of their ambition. Because if our AI can successfully control the leader of Israel, one of the most sophisticated intelligence states in the world, then it can control anyone, he explained. You're not the target, Benjamin, you're the proof of concept. The underground facility around them suddenly made sense. This wasn't just about manipulating Netanyahu or controlling Israel. This was about developing a system that could predict and control the behavior of every world leader, and Netanyahu had just helped them perfect it. The recordings from tonight will be analyzed to improve our behavioral prediction algorithms, Macron continued. Your responses, your emotional patterns, your decision-making process, all of it will be used to make the system more accurate for future targets. Netanyahu understood now why he had felt so confident during their earlier conversation. The AI had been designed to make him feel that way, to ensure he would react exactly as needed for their research. But there was one more revelation that made everything even worse. Benjamin, you're wondering if you're the first world leader we've tested this on, Macron said, reading his expression perfectly. The answer is no. We've been running these experiments for 2 years now. Leaders across Africa, South America, Eastern Europe, all of them have undergone similar tests without ever knowing it. The implications were staggering. How many international crises had been artificially created to test this system? How many wars, economic collapses and political upheavals had been orchestrated as experiments in human manipulation? And Netanyahu realized that he was looking at the future of global power. Traditional military force, economic pressure, diplomatic negotiations, all of it was becoming obsolete. Why invade a country when you could simply reprogram its leaders to serve your interests? Why negotiate when you could predict and control the other party's decisions? Welcome to the New World Order, Benjamin, Macron said as they prepared to leave the facility. A world where French AI systems predict and control global politics. The 3 words that had changed everything weren't complete, total, surrender. They were predict, control, dominate. Netanyahu left Paris that night as a fundamentally different person, not because his character had changed, but because he now understood that his character, his thoughts, his decisions, his very identity as a leader, could be manipulated by algorithms that understood human psychology better than humans understood themselves. Those 14 seconds in Paris had indeed changed everything. They marked the moment when traditional political power died, and artificial intelligence became the ultimate weapon of international control. Netanyahu thought he was fighting for Israel's independence. Instead, he had helped create the technology that would end independence for every nation on earth. And the most terrifying part, this was just the beginning. Within 5 years, the French AI system would be deployed against every major world leader. Democracy, dictatorship, monarchy, none of it would matter. Political power would belong to whoever controlled the algorithms that controlled the politicians. The 3 words that started as a threat to one man had become the foundation of humanity's surrender to artificial intelligence. And Netanyahu, the master manipulator who had survived decades of Middle Eastern politics, became the first leader to discover that in the age of AI, everyone is just data waiting to be processed.